Picture a battlefield. A man in a bowler hat calmly walks toward enemy lines, carrying nothing but an umbrella. Artillery thunders, machine guns chatter, and he pauses only to politely open a gate in the barbed wire instead of cutting it. Or imagine a commando unit whose leader insists on charging into battle with a longbow, a sword, and a set of bagpipes. These aren't cartoon sketches. They are real British officers from the Second World War. To outsiders, it looks like madness. But to the people following them, it somehow makes a strange kind of sense. So why are the British so eccentric in war? Why do their most memorable soldiers seem to have stepped out of an absurdist play, yet still manage to win battles? This apparent eccentricity isn't just a personal quirk. It's a weapon, a culture, and a shield, all woven into the fabric of British military history. To understand it, you have to look beyond the funny stories and into the deep anxieties of an island nation that always expected to be outnumbered, outgunned, and slightly out of its depth. Britain's military eccentricity begins with class and education. For generations, officers came from schools where young men were trained to treat pain as trivial, emotions as embarrassing, and danger as an opportunity for a joke. The ideal gentleman was unflappable, slightly aloof, and never seemed to be trying too hard. On the sports fields of Eton and Harrow, this became a performance. You'd get hit in the face with a cricket ball and laugh it off. In war, that same performance turned into a survival tool. Now, contrast that with the industrial slaughter of World War I. Millions of men were fed into trenches where life swung between boredom and terror. The British way of coping often looked bizarre. Officers would insist on shaving before an attack. Men brewed tea under shellfire. Regiments played football in no man's land just minutes before going over the top. These rituals weren't about denial. They were acts of control in a world that made no sense. If you can insist that the proper response to incoming artillery is to straighten your tie and mutter, "Bit loud today, isn't it?" then you've stolen a small victory over fear. This brings us to figures like Mad Jack Churchill, who in World War II stormed beaches with a longbow and sword because, as he put it, any officer who goes into action without his sword is improperly dressed. Or Lieutenant Colonel Popsky Peniakov, a one-armed, one-eyed commander of a tiny raiding unit that roamed the North African desert, blowing up German airfields and drinking prodigious amounts of tea. Compared to the crisp, mechanized image of German military efficiency, these men looked like characters from an adventure novel who had somehow wandered into a very serious war, yet their unpredictability was an asset. It confused the enemy, inspired their own troops, and reinforced the idea that British forces played by rules no one else quite understood. Compare this to American or Soviet commanders, often seen as hard-driving professionals obsessed with logistics and firepower. The British cultivated something different. The officer who pretended not to notice the danger, who couched orders as polite suggestions, who talked about a spot of bother when everyone else called it a catastrophe. This wasn't just cultural flair. It was psychological warfare, aimed as much at their own nerves as at the enemy. Eccentricity also became a way to legitimize unorthodox tactics within a conservative system. If you were the sort of officer who wore odd hats and quoted obscure poetry, it was somehow less shocking when you proposed forming a unit of misfits to sneak behind enemy lines. Many of Britain's most effective special operations units were born from this mixture of seriousness and silliness. The Special Air Service, or SAS, began as a desert raiding idea involving jeeps and improbable navigation. It was a plan so wild, it just might work. Underneath all this lies a deeper national habit: using humor and oddity to avoid the embarrassment of taking yourself too seriously. Other countries might announce their destiny with drums and banners. Britain jokes about muddling through, makes tea, and hopes nobody notices it's absolutely terrified. This posture served an empire built on thin margins and constant improvisation. A small island relying on bluff, theatrics, and an unnerving ability to pretend everything was fine. Even as the empire faded, that habit remained, especially in the armed forces. Modern British soldiers are, of course, highly trained professionals. But the old flavor hasn't entirely gone. In the Falklands War, officers carried umbrellas as unit mascots. In Afghanistan and Iraq, reports were full of gallows humor and that distinctive mix of complaint and understatement that never quite concedes defeat. Even when operating alongside larger forces, British units often cultivate an image of scruffy, sarcastic underdogs who make do with less gear and more jokes. That, in the end, is the paradox of British eccentricity in war. It looks like chaos, but it is choreographed. It sounds ridiculous, but it's rooted in fear, discipline, and long habit. It reassures anxious soldiers, wrong-foots confident enemies, and turns vulnerability into a performance. So the next time you hear a story about a British officer bringing a tea set to the front line or marching into battle with bagpipes, don't just laugh. You're seeing a very strange, very old, and very effective weapon in action. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this, please like and subscribe for more stories like it.